Hi everyone, this is Tim Sahay. I'm the co-director of the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab at Johns Hopkins with Bentley Allen, and this memo is based on joint work with different work that I started at the Atlantic Council with Ben Judah and Shaheen Valley. And the title of the memo is Escaping the Permanent Suez, the Obstacles to European Green Investment. Um, in this, what we are arguing is that the transition to the oil age was brutal for Europe. Simply put, unlike Russia and the Gulf kingdoms and the United States, the soils and the seas of the European states did not have enough to power themselves. And this fact left it at a historic disadvantage. And Europe has been caught in various relationships of dependency and vulnerability between the US, Russia, and Gulf monarchies that were the victors of the oil age. And what we argue in this um, memo is that even to this day, this fundamental underlying condition of vulnerability hasn't changed. Russia's assault on Ukraine, triggering the energy war and the massive inflationary shock that has rolled over its consumers, has driven European treasuries deeper in debt. And in 2022, just like in 1973, when it was hit with the Arab oil embargo, Western Europe found its fundamental vulnerability exploited over a war in its periphery. And this condition is what we identify as the permanent Suez. So, how can Europe sort of escape this permanent Suez? Europe's geopolitical viability in this transition will depend upon it overcoming a series of internal blockages with very challenging trade offs. Domestic, foreign, and energy policies cannot be disentangled in the geopolitics of the transition to net zero. And what we identify is that the EU will have to overcome 5 fundamental challenges to energy, fiscal, and foreign policy to navigate this transition effectively. The first is the fiscal problem, which is that the bloc's fiscal rules constrain investment. They constrain putting actual serious money towards the energy transition, which is relevant for this workshop because it severely constrains mineral demand. Mineral demand is largely going to come from the 3 cores of the world economy: US, EU, and East Asia. And here, what we're identifying is that the bloc's fiscal rules and its ineptly small EU budget are limiting the necessary financing of very pretty policies like the Critical Raw Materials Act and the Net Zero Industrial Plan that the European Commission has come out. There's just not enough money being put into the transition. The second problem that we identify is the hostage problem, which is that national politics have to be overcome by domestic anti-transition forces and interests. We've already seen a rollback of European green policies in Italy, in Germany, and in the UK most recently, that are now limiting policies that were meant to support EV vehicles and ban internal combustion engines by 2030 or 2035, or policies that were meant to encourage boilers. There are significant actors that are holding the green transition hostage, and the unique sort of structure of the EU gives each of them a veto power because policies have to be approved unanimously. The third, which you can call the collective action problem. The fourth problem is the just transition problem, exemplified by the Yellow Vest mass protest movement in France that showed the risk of a lack of popular legitimacy when emissions are known to be caused by the richest countries and richest social groups in each country. And the fifth problem is the hard problem of industrial policy, which is that Europe's industrial base is eroded and industrial dirigisme is hard. It is prone to white elephants, and it's getting harder as climate change and geopolitical competition disrupt supply chains. And what we argue is that addressing these fundamental questions and difficult trade-offs is essential for Europe to take the necessary leap out of its permanent Suez, or it could worsen. And in this sort of short thing, I'm just sort of quickly going to highlight for you some elements of the fiscal problem, which we argue is the single biggest obstacle to the European green transition, and to understand why this choice of macroeconomic policy determines Europe's ability to go green, look no further than what happened in the 2010s, what happened with green investments when the EU perceived very ruinous austerity policy as a macroeconomic policy. And you would expect Europe is a continent that has wanted to go green for many decades. Its solar panel installations should just be a steady upward march of getting bigger and bigger, but we saw a collapse in solar investments post 2010 when the European Union adopted harsh, constraining fiscal policy, and Europe had a massive slowdown in solar panel installations for almost 8 years, since that it is only now starting to pick up since 2018, 2019. And so, as it stands, we argue this is the single biggest obstacle to European decarbonization. And European populists are already building an arc of reluctance, and they're positioning themselves as climate skeptics. Whether in Germany, the AfD has pitched itself as a pro-diesel party that is opposing various phase-outs. In the last European election, the AfD received the party's largest share of vote in the coal-rich regions of Brandenburg and Saxony. And this is a pan-European trend. In the Netherlands, the Dutch populist and conservative parties have protested the ammonia tax. In Italy, the Brothers of Italy coalition have denounced EU decarbonization policies as hurting both consumers and industries. And the danger is that these parties sort of crystallize an anti-climate policy coalition in the next European Parliament after June 2024, and we are already seeing signs of this dynamic of contestation. And these risks are not lost on European leaders. At the highest levels of leadership, there's signs of openness to deep change. So German Chancellor Scholz has argued in favor of adopting majority voting for issues of foreign policy and fiscal issues and taxations in EU policy making. So it is incumbent that it is therefore spending decisions should be taken under a qualified majority, not a full unanimous consensus. And this requires deep constitutional changes to the bloc, and we argue that this should be the main topic of discussion in European election campaigns. Otherwise, there is no exit to the Permanent Suez.